There is a specific person you trusted when something in you said not to. You pushed the feeling down. You called yourself paranoid. You gave them the benefit of the doubt because that is what reasonable people do. And then, not immediately but eventually, they showed you exactly what you had already sensed in that very first moment. That feeling you dismissed was not overthinking. It was the most accurate read you had in that entire situation. And the fact that you were taught to call it paranoia instead of perception is the reason you did not act on it when it would have mattered most. This video is about that specific kind of knowing, the red flag signal that arrives clearly, gets labeled as overthinking, and gets overridden until the situation has already cost you something real. Psychology has a precise explanation for why this happens, why it happens consistently to people with your cognitive profile, and why the people around you so rarely pick up the same signals until it is far too late to matter. But before we get into the mechanism, there is one specific type of person that deep thinkers and overthinkers are most consistently right about from the very beginning, and most consistently talked out of trusting their read on. We will name that type precisely before this video ends. And when we do, at least one specific face from your past will come to mind immediately. I can almost guarantee it. First, here is what is actually happening when you sense a red flag that nobody else seems to notice. Your mind is running a continuous comparison between two things simultaneously. What a person is presenting, their words, their stated intentions, their performed warmth or competence or reliability, and what their behavior across time is actually demonstrating. Most people around you are only processing the first layer. They are taking the current interaction at face value because that is cognitively efficient and socially comfortable. You are processing both layers automatically. And when those two layers do not align, when the story someone is telling about themselves does not match the details that do not quite fit, your mind flags the inconsistency immediately. That flag is what gets called overthinking. But it is not excess thought. It is pattern integrity checking. Your mind noticed that the data does not add up and refused to file it as resolved until it does. That is not a cognitive malfunction. That is one of the most practically valuable perceptual capabilities a person can have. Here is the strange part. The same process that gets called overthinking when applied to people gets called expertise when applied to everything else. A doctor who notices subtle symptoms before they fully develop is called perceptive. A lawyer who catches the inconsistency in a contract before it becomes a problem is called thorough. But when you notice subtle inconsistencies in someone's behavior before they materialize into something undeniable, you are told you are creating problems that do not exist. The process is identical. Only the subject matter changed. And this double standard has cost you something real over the years. Not just the specific situations where you overrode the signal and paid for it, but the gradual erosion of trust in the most reliable warning system you have. Because you were taught, through enough repetitions of being called paranoid, oversensitive, or difficult, to treat your clearest perceptions as suspects rather than as intelligence. Most people completely miss how that erosion actually happens. It is not one dramatic moment of being told your perception is wrong. It is the accumulation of smaller moments. Someone you trusted told you the person you were uneasy about was fine. The group consensus was that you were reading too much into it. The social pressure to be fair, to give people a chance, to not be the one who makes things uncomfortable. All of it stacked up against a signal you could feel but could not yet prove. And so you deferred. Again. And again. Until deferring became the default and trusting your read became something that required more courage than it should. But here is where it gets really interesting. Because the signal you were overriding was not random. It was specific. And the specificity of what you were picking up, before anyone else could see it, is what makes what you do so different from ordinary social caution. You were not picking up vague unease. You were detecting specific behavioral patterns that do not match stated intentions. The difference between what someone said and what their face communicated in the moment they said it. The way a certain type of warmth felt performed rather than genuine. Too consistent, too strategic, arriving at exactly the moments it was most useful. The specific quality of someone's attention when they wanted something from you versus when they did not. The way an explanation had one too many details, the kind of detail that people only add when they are constructing a story rather than simply telling one. These are not vague feelings. They are data points. Specific, observable, behaviorally grounded data points that your mind assembles into a pattern before your conscious reasoning has caught up with what the pattern means. And this connects directly to the type of person I mentioned at the beginning, the one that overthinkers are most consistently right about from the very first interaction and most consistently talked out of trusting their instincts on. It is the person everyone else likes immediately, the one who is socially fluent, immediately warm, easy to be around. The one whose charm is so effective that pointing out your unease sounds not just wrong but slightly unfair, because nothing they have done is obviously wrong. Their behavior is technically fine, and yet something in you has been quietly, persistently flagging them from almost the moment you met. That specific discomfort, in the presence of someone everyone else finds perfectly pleasant, is one of the most reliable signals your perceptual system produces. Not because charming people are necessarily dangerous, but because your sensitivity to the gap between presentation and reality is highest precisely when the presentation is most polished. The more carefully managed someone's social performance is, the more clearly you feel the management. And feeling the management, even when you cannot yet identify what is being managed, is itself important information. Have you ever tried to explain this to someone? The feeling about a person who seems perfectly fine by every visible standard? You have probably watched their face move through polite interest into quiet skepticism. And you probably stopped explaining. Not because you doubted the feeling, because you doubted whether the explanation would ever be received by someone who had not felt it themselves. That experience of being right about someone and having no language the room would accept for why you knew is one of the most isolating things about perceiving at your level. You carry the knowledge alone. You watch the situation develop. And when it eventually confirms what you already knew, there is no satisfaction in it. Just the specific exhaustion of having been right too early and too quietly to have made any difference. Here is what changes when you stop treating that early signal as overthinking and start treating it as intelligence. You do not act on every impression impulsively. Discernment is not the same as paranoia in the opposite direction. But you stop requiring the signal to be provable before you take it seriously. You stop needing the room's consensus to validate what you are already clearly perceiving. You stop waiting for the behavior to become undeniable, which is always later than necessary, before allowing yourself to adjust how much trust you extend. The signal arrived early for a reason. Your perceptual system delivered it before your social compliance system had time to override it. And the window between that early signal and the moment social pressure kicks in and tells you to be reasonable, that window is when the information is most useful and most actionable. Trust it there. Not recklessly, not without discernment, but without the reflex to immediately dismiss it as too much, too soon, or too unfair to the person you have not yet given enough of a chance. Because the people who have cost you most were not the ones you mistrusted too quickly. They were the ones you trusted too long after you already knew better. Tell me in the comments, has there been a person in your life that you sensed something was off about immediately, dismissed it, and then were proven right? You do not have to share details. Just tell me, did you trust the feeling or talk yourself out of it?